I was asked here today to speak about the threat to free speech from religious fundamentalism, which I have some experience of myself, which is large and is growing, and I think reflects the wider need for free speech. But before I do, I think it would be remiss to not explain that I've had, I think, a valuable lesson for me in the past week about the value of free speech. As some of you will know, I did something wrong. I did something idiotic. And some people use their freedom of speech to point that out. And the real test of free speech is not do you support it when people are saying you're great. It's do you support it when people are saying something painful and humiliating about you? And I absolutely do. And more than that, I've learned that it's when you're in the wrong that you need free speech the most. Because it's only if people are free to point out your mistakes and to do it aggressively and loudly and with laughter that you learn to get it right. And as much as it hurts, and it has really hurt, I feel more keenly the value of free speech today than I ever have. What I'd like to talk about now is a different parable about free speech, one in which I play a thankfully smaller role. It's the speech I was asked here to give. Back in 2009, I wrote an article in which I warned that the right to criticise religion is being slowly doused in acid. All over the world, the small incremental gains made by secularism, which give us the space to doubt and question and make up our own minds, are being beaten back by belligerent demands that we respect religion. And I warned that a particular historical marker was being passed, which I think showed how far we were being shoved. The UN has a rapporteur whose job is to be the global guardian of free speech. And he was having his job rewritten to put him on the side of the religious censors. I'll just explain. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights stated 60 years ago that, these are the words, "A world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief is the highest aspiration of the common people." It's a Magna Carta for mankind, and it's loathed by every human rights abuser out there everywhere. You know, today the Chinese government calls it Western, Robert Mugabe calls it colonialist, and Dick Cheney calls it outdated. And the countries of the world have failed to meet it serially. But that document is something that every dissident everywhere in the world can hold up and say, this is my right. I have this. You don't have the right to take this away from me. And then the UN was proposing to change that. What happened is, starting in 1999, a coalition of Islamic fundamentalist tyrants, despised by their own people, as we've seen this year, led by the disgusting tyrant of Saudi Arabia, demanded these rules be rewritten. The demand for everyone to be able to think and speak freely failed, they said, to respect the unique sensitivities of the religious. They said they should be replaced with something called an Islamic Declaration of Human Rights, which said that you can speak within, quote, the limits set by Sharia law. It is not permitted to spread falsehood or disseminate that which involves encouraging abomination or forsaking the Islamic community, end quote. So in other words, you can say what you want as long as the mullahs say you can say it. And it's a declaration that makes it clear there's no rights for women, there's no rights for gays, there's no rights for non-Muslims, there's no rights for so-called apostates who change their view. And it's really one of the interesting things about religious fundamentalists is it's like they have a trade union. The Vatican came in and said, yeah, we kind of agree with this. So you had this coalition of fundamentalists. And incredibly, they were succeeding. The UN's rapporteur on human rights was tasked with exposing and shaming those who prevent free speech, including the religious. But the Pakistani delegate demanded and got a really positive response when he said that the job description should be changed so that this person's job should instead be to condemn, quote, abuses of free expression, including defamation of religion. Remember, this is in the wake of the Mohammed cartoons affair, in which drawing a cartoon was declared to be a capital offence by many governments across the world. And the council agreed. So the job was being turned on its head. Instead of condemning the people who wanted to murder Salman Rushdie, the United Nations would be condemning Salman Rushdie himself. So Anything that can be deemed religious was declared to be no longer the subject of discussion at the UN. A great man called Roy Brown, head of the International Humanist and Ethical Union, tried to bring up the topic of the stoning of women accused of adultery. And the Egyptian delegate stood up and he said, "We will not have this discussion. Islam will not be crucified in this council." And Brown was ordered to shut up. Of course, the first victims of locking down free speech about Islam are those women who are Muslim, who are going to be stoned. Those gay people who are Muslim, who are going to be stoned. And it was being done with the imprimatur of the United Nations. And those of us who support the UN and love the UN and hate the American right constantly demonizing it, we're the people who need to be most angry about that. And underpinning these reforms is an argument that is seeping into our society as well, that atheism and doubt are akin to racism. Today, if you criticize a superstitious belief, people will tell you you are being prejudiced, that you are being bigoted. My only prejudice in this matter is in favour of individuals being able to choose to live their lives their way without intimidation. That means choosing religion or rejecting religion as they wish after hearing the open and disputatious argument about it. A religious idea is an idea someone had a long time ago they claimed to have received from God. That's it. It doesn't have a different status to other ideas. It is not surrounded by an electric wire fence called respect that none of us can cross. All people deserve respect, but not all ideas do. And in response to this change, what I wrote was, and this got a reaction I'll get to in a minute, if you want me to be honest, I don't respect the idea a man was born of a virgin, walked on water and rose from the dead. I don't respect the idea that we should follow a so-called prophet who at the age of 53 had sex with a 9-year-old girl and ordered the murder of whole villages of Jews because they wouldn't follow him. I don't respect the idea that the West Bank should be given to Jewish fundamentalists and the Palestinians should be bombed and bullied into surrendering it. I don't respect the idea that I might have lived before as a woodlouse and might live again as a goat. You know, I don't. And if you ask me to say I respect that, you're asking me to con you. Now, after I made this case, something kind of strange happened. An Indian newspaper called The Statesman, which is one of the oldest and most venerable newspapers in the country, thought the article accorded with the tradition of Indian secularism and they reprinted it. And just afterwards, 3,000 Islamic fundamentalists rioted outside their offices calling for me, the editor and the publisher, to be arrested or killed. One of the... believe me, it puts a Twitter hashtag in context. One of the rioters was quoted at the time saying, a guy called Abdus Subhan, who said he was prepared to lay down his life if necessary to protect the honour of the Prophet and that I should be sent to hell. And 2 days later, the editor and the publisher were in fact arrested and they were charged in the world's largest democracy with a constitution that supposedly guarantees the right to free speech for upsetting community feeling. And I was told if I went to Calcutta, I would be arrested. And when it happened, you know, just like, it's hard to know how to react to these things. And I thought, what do you do if you're a defender of free speech in this position? I believe the right to criticise religion and follow the facts wherever they lead us is one of the most precious rights we can have. So the people who said to me, apologise, I thought, I can't do that. And it's worth just touching on the arguments put forward by the rioting fundamentalists, because we're going to keep hearing them in this century. As secularism is assaulted again and again. They said I had upset the harmony of India, and it could only be restored by the silencing of these words. But it's a really interesting model of harmony that religious fundamentalists put forward. It means they're free to say whatever they want, and the rest of us have to shut up and agree. Well, that doesn't sound very harmonious to me. Now, the protesters said... The protesters said that I deliberately set out to offend them. And I'm supposed to reply by saying, no, I didn't want to offend anyone, no offence was intended. But the reality is more complicated. Offending fundamentalists is not my goal. But if it's an inevitable side effect of opposing their ridiculous ideas, well, fine, so be it. You know, if fanatics who believe that women should be imprisoned in their homes and gay people should be killed are insulted by me arguing back, I don't resile from it. Nothing worth saying is inoffensive to everyone. Nothing worth saying will fail to make you enemies, and nothing worth saying will not produce a confrontation. No one in this room has a right to be ring-fenced from offence. Every day I'm offended, not least by ancient religious texts filled with hate speech about people like me. Now, a lot more trivially, a lot of people have said a lot of offensive things about me in the past week. But I'm glad because I know the price of taking offence is that I can give offence if that's where the facts lead me. It's a two-way street. We can scream and shout at each other. What we can't do is try to stop the game and say, no, I can say what I want, you can't say what you want. And these events are also, I think, a reminder of why it's so important to try to let the oxygen of rationality into religious debates and introduce doubt. Voltaire, who was one of the great anti-clericalists, said, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." If you can be made to believe the absurd notion that an invisible deity dictated an eternal, unchanging truth to a specific person at a specific time in history, and he knows what kind of sex he wants you to have, he doesn't want you to eat a ham sandwich, and anyone who disagrees is evil, you can easily be made to demand ludicrous things like the death of journalists and free women and gay people who question that truth. But if you introduce just a moment of doubt, if they know there's another argument, if there's a nagging question at the back of their minds, then they're more likely to hesitate. And that's why these ideas have to be challenged at their core using reason. Now, if after the discussion and all the facts about how contradictory and periodically vile their holy texts are, religious people still choose literal faith, I passionately defend their right to make their case. Free speech is for people who are wrong and people who are right. It's for Geert-Wilders being a bigot about Muslims. It's for Muslims being a bigot about gay people. It's for all of us. Fine, make the argument. If you disagree, if you don't like what someone says, argue back. Make a better case. Persuade people. Get it right. Do it better. The best way to discredit a bad argument is to let people hear it. And just as a couple of final thoughts, if I look around this room and I try to imagine what the lives of all of us here would be like if amazing people before us, people, brave people, had not pushed at the limits of what religious people said we could do and say. The women, well, the women wouldn't be sitting among the men. If any of you women are menstruating, get out. If anyone here has masturbated, I'm not looking at anyone, you'd be dead. If anyone here was gay, you'd be dead. If you committed adultery, you'd be dead. It is precisely the mechanism of free speech. If I think about my grandmother's lives, both my grandmothers died recently. I think about the lives they led. They both had to leave school when they were 14. They were clever women who had such frustrated lives where they were, treated badly. One of them lived in the Swiss mountains, which is pretty reactionary. It was because people were free to argue and say, don't treat women like that. There was Gay Pride last Saturday. I spoke to someone a couple of years ago who said he was at one of the first Gay Prides in the early 60s in Trafalgar Square. 26 people turned up and they were all arrested and beaten by the police. And if you had stood in Trafalgar Square on that day and you had said, and you had told those 26 people, use your right to peacefully persuade people. You're not going to threaten anyone. You're not going to have any violence. And 60 years from now, they're going to shut down central London for this. And there will be hundreds of thousands of straight people there. And the people who think you're disgusting, they'll be the ones regarded as the freaks. And there'll be gay married couples, and there'll be members of the government who are gay. It would have seemed like the most ludicrous utopia. But it happened because of free speech, and because people could peacefully try and persuade each other, and because people fought for secularism. And you can see the value of that secularism if you compare my very minor experience in 2009 when I got these threats to that of journalists living under these religious fundamentalist regimes. Because generations of British people fought to create a secular space. When I went to the police, they offered me total protection. When those people go to the police, they're handed over to the fanatics, or they're charged for their crimes, or the police are the ones who come for them. They're people like Syed Pervez Kambash, the young Afghan journalism student who was sentenced to death for downloading a report on women's rights. There are 1,000 reasons why I am so proud to work for The Independent, but the biggest is that we campaigned for him and he did not get executed because of that. And this model of criticism and rational dispute needs to be applied to all forms of power, to politicians, to the religious, to corporations, and yes, to the journalists like me who give you speeches about the need to dispute everything. The more we're all monitoring each other and arguing about it freely and speaking our minds and exposing wrongdoing whenever it occurs, the more we'll all get it right. Thank you.